Welcome to PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. I'm delighted to be joined by former referee Hugh Dallas. Hugh, it's a pleasure to have you on. We're just chatting there about Sunday's cup final at Hampden. So if you had a word of advice for John, what would it be?
Yeah, it's always special, you know, an Old Firm game. Any Old Firm game special, but of course when you then throw in the cup final into the mix, it makes it even more. A lot of scrutiny on John's an experienced Old Firm referee now, so he'll prepare the way he always does, you know, in a professional way, and I'm quite sure he'll come through it, you know, with flying colours. What
was your preparation, and is it different, one for a cup final and two for a Celtic-Rangers run? You maybe get an extra edge to things, a different kind of intensity to it?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to do the two cup finals in '99 and 2002, and it was Scottish Cup final, so there's a big build-up, you know, to the cup final, a lot of stuff to be done, particularly media and bits and bobs. That normally doesn't come with if there is such a thing as a run-of-the-mill Old Firm game, you know, a league match. So there is a bit more attention, you know, in the run-up to a cup final. But the preparation doesn't change. You know, I always went really early morning for a walk and just to clear your mind. And you really wanted the family to sort of step back, you know, give you a bit of space. I like to get away from the house early. I like to get to the hotel quite early, you know, to be with your colleagues and make sure that there were no stone unturned before you arrived at the stadium, you know.
Does it help when you know players? Does it help if you've got a kind of working relationship on the pitch with key players? I'm thinking here of maybe both captains that you're able to go and have a quiet word with maybe before the game kicks off.
Yeah, not so much before the game, because you need to remember that you don't want to go into their environment. You don't want to go into their office and start to, you know, disturb them. In our day, you used to go into the dressing room and inspect, you know, the boots and the kit and stuff like that, and that sometimes is a bit uncomfortable because you know you're really going into an area where you're not used to. That's stopped now. All the kit and everything's all done pre-match. It's all done in the tunnel, so you let everybody prepare, including, you know, the match officials in their own way.
When you look back now, do you miss these games? Or do you look back now and think with some relief that you're not back involved in it again?
No, I don't think it's ever relief. You know, when you know it comes to the end and you have to stop. Of course, you know that day's coming. You know, so you start to prepare for that, and then of course you become involved in other ways, still involved in refereeing. But of course you miss, you know, I mean in the latter stages when you come off the international list, that was always a great buzz. Then when you have to step back because of age, really the games that you look forward to were the Glasgow derbies and the Edinburgh derbies, you know, the big games. So you miss the Old Firm games for a couple of seasons until you realise the legs are telling you, you know, that it's time to.
Is that right? Can you think of a moment where you thought, I'm struggling here?
I could when in my last season internationally, I felt that doing a top Champions League game on a Wednesday night and then having maybe a big game on a Saturday, I was always capable of doing them, but the recovery time was taking a wee bit longer. So maybe on a Saturday morning when you woke up, the legs were still a bit sore, where maybe the season before that or 2 seasons before that you were getting up and you were buzzing on a Saturday. So certainly everybody's different. You know, we had some really fit referees who could have done a match every night of the week, but certainly the midweek games internationally became, you know, the main focal point of your week. And then when you were coming back, say maybe sort of late on a Thursday night, you were really only the Friday to recover after your travel, and then you were straight back into it on a possible an Old Firm game on a Saturday at 12:30. You know, so not a lot of recovery.
Yeah. Obviously, too, in the aftermath of these games, there are always moments to chew over. It's rarely that a game goes without a bit of controversy or people poring over specific incidences. Yeah. How did you cope with that then, and how do you think referees cope with it now when you have a different kind of glare because of social media and because of the amplification of the noise around decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question, because in my day we didn't have, well, social media was just beginning to come in at that time. So it was your normal sort of newspapers and, you know, Saturday night, you know, highlights and But of course, there's still a huge media interest in an Old Firm game all over the world. But you don't read it. It was as simple as that. I mean, I don't do social media. I've never done social media. I never will do social media. And we know that I'll probably be one of them, the minority, because referees will read it, but you need to be prepared then for what you're going to read, because for every positive comment there'll be 10 negative. So I always advise referees, don't touch it, stay out it, and that feel, it won't affect you. The difference in the game now, of course, is we've got VAR, which is huge. People say, would you like to referee in the new era now? And for that reason, I would, because when you make a mistake, if it's a clear mistake, they talk about it for years. Now, referees have been patted on the back as they leave the stadium for correcting a mistake that they made, where in our day, we didn't have that luxury. So now VAR is, and VAR is not perfect. It's not perfect, but it definitely helps the accuracy in decision making for sure.
You think it would have been a benefit to you? You think you would definitely have enhanced performances for referees?
I think so. I didn't think I made many mistakes, but I'm quite sure I'm in the minority, when I say that. But any big mistakes, I can think of maybe 3 or 4, including internationally, really big mistakes that you go back and think, wow, those would have been corrected. But VAR isn't there to bring you to the monitor for a subjective decision, and inside outside is fact, so that's fine. But is it a penalty? Is it not a penalty? So, for instance, I'm working in the Premier League now in England, and in the Premier League, it's really, wow, I've made a mistake. So when a referee goes to the monitor, they really expect to see something that they've totally missed, not 10 different replays and at the monitor for 3-4 minutes. That's not what we're looking for. And I know in Scotland that Willie Collum, since he's came in, has made a huge difference to the application of VAR. So that's the way it should be intended to be used.
You made an interesting comment there about a couple of decisions, a couple of mistakes that you maybe look back on. Are you willing to share what you think those ones would have been?
They're nothing. I can think of one in the World Cup qualifier in Spain that I made. When the player went past the goalkeeper, I gave the penalty kick, and I just knew, the reaction of the goalkeeper, the sheepishness of the attacker, and when I saw it, it was such a poor decision, really. Now, thankfully, it never impacted, on qualification or anything, but domestically, there'll always be decisions that you'll give a penalty or no penalty, or you maybe give a red card. For instance, one of my biggest mistakes I made was giving John O'Neill a second yellow card in the St Johnstone Celtic game at McDermott Park in a midweek game, when I thought he'd kick somebody, when in fact he was kicking the grass off the bottom of his boot. That wouldn't change now, because VAR can't get involved in second yellow cards. So that would still, every time I see John O'Neill, I think I need to buy him a beer, because it was horrendous. But the reaction of all the crowd that night, everybody jumped, the assistant never reacted. I went red. Nobody said anything apart from poor John O'Neill. But that wouldn't be corrected now either, so.
In the aftermath of a big game like this, when there is a possibility of maybe a wrong decision that can have a huge effect on the outcome, how does a referee cope with it? What's the mental side of the game to cope with all of that?
Yeah, I mean, the late great Tom Wharton once said to me that, if you make a mistake, don't go to the other end and try and balance it, because you've doubled your mistakes. And I always took that, with me. But you need to wipe it out, because it's not going to change. The mistake will still be there. It'll be there at time up. It'll be there next week, and it'll be there forever. So to try and think that you could balance that it just doesn't happen that way. That's not the way referees think. So you just need to get on with it. And referees are quite, strong-minded. To get to that level, I think you need to have that sort of ability to blank something off and just move on.
It's almost a single-mindedness, you think you need?
I think so, and that can be an issue sometimes also, that you can become so single-minded that you become stubborn, and then sometimes you should maybe change a decision and you don't. So there's a balance, there in refereeing, not to be too single-minded. But when you get to the level of refereeing an Old Firm game, then you've came through quite an apprenticeship, you know, to get to that level, and where the SFA or the SPFL trust you, you know, to go out and do the showpiece match.
Do you remember the first one that you done?
Cup final.
The first Celtic-Rangers game
Yeah,
itself?
I do remember it. It was a 3-3 draw at Ibrox, and it was one of those games where everything happened, everything that it could happen happened. You know, we had players in the net, you know, no fighting with each other, but we had Pierre van Hooijdonk, who had been already cautioned in the game, scored a magnificent equaliser at the Celtic end in those days at Ibrox, and he ran into the crowd, and that is an automatic yellow card. And I looked into the Celtic end, and I thought, why would I waste this for Van Hooijdonk? He's scored a goal on an Old Firm, and I never gave the second yellow card. And I remember the secretary of Rangers coming into the dressing room at the end of the game, and I thought he was going to give me, you know, both barrels. And he says, thanks so much. He says, because that could have caused a real issue, you know, spectator-wise, you showing a red card. So using a wee bit of common sense in these games, you do get a little bit more licence, because your job is really to try and keep the players on the pitch. Of course, if they cross that line, then you need to take action, but you're working, you know, so hard in a game like that. Physically, it was never a problem for me, but mentally, when you came off, you were exhausted. You know, you could just, it was draining because of the amount of pressure that you know you're under. But that's what referees want to do. They want to do the big games.
Is it important then, seeing a game like that, is it important that you do have a couple of players on each side that you know you can speak to? If someone is getting a bit carried away with the emotion of the game and maybe caught up in the atmosphere and the tribalism around it, it's important to be able to go to someone and say, listen, you need to try and calm them down a wee bit.
There's no doubt about that. And John Beaton, you know, on Sunday will have already identified players that he will get to early. Some players, you know, are a little bit more difficult to manage in Old Firm games than others. And I know when I refereed, there were players like Paul McStay and Richard Goff were the two captains in my first Old Firm game, and you would be talking to them throughout the game, because they were great examples of captains, and I think you need to be an example when you're a captain. So you'd be talking to Paul or Richard and saying, you know, Paul Lambert was another great, you know, guy you could speak to throughout the game, to get to other players and say, look, you need to. Sometimes it didn't work, you know, it just didn't work, and you say, right, okay,
it's just an avenue.
I've gave everybody a chance, you know, but also players that you knew were going to be in the mix, you know, like Ian Ferguson, you know, at Rangers, you know, Peter Grant, you knew these guys were, because they were the engine room, you know, and they were in there to stir it up, and you used to get to them early and say, you know, you're better on the pitch than off the pitch, so work with me. And, you know, generally they did.
Do you see players just now, do you see a difference in players generationally now with the way that things are, and with maybe a bit more distance between referees and players?
I don't know. I don't know about distance, because I think people like John Beaton and Nick Walsh and these guys, I think they'll try to have a relationship. I think the social media side has maybe driven, you know, people apart, because they don't want to be saying something in case they're filmed or in case somebody comments, a referee said this to me, and because it just goes viral now. Where in our day, you know, it was entirely different. But I still think there is a relationship there, you know, with players, but maybe not the same. In our day, there was also a different generation of player. There were more Scots on the pitch in Old Firm games. I mean, I'm at a game last night, you know, watching the Europa League match, Rangers and Tottenham last night, and at one stage there wasn't one Scottish player, you know, on the pitch. So that's different than an Old Firm game. So in our day, it was. Maybe it meant more to them, I don't know. Foreign players coming in probably don't realise exactly what it means to the fans, but they quickly learn, that's for sure.
Did you ever feel a difference within games if you maybe have a manager who is under pressure at points and maybe there's been a lot of noise about what's going on at a club, and I think probably Philip Clement has bought a bit of time just across the last 3 or 4 weeks with pretty big results. You mentioned that draw last night against Spurs. I think there's maybe not the same kind of pressure on him that might have been a couple of weeks back. But do you feel that decisions come under a particular kind of scrutiny when you have a manager like that who's maybe just been under a lot of pressure going into the game?
I think every decision will be scrutinised anyway. I think certainly managers scrutinise decisions, and of course now they've got the monitors and they've got iPads and things in their technical area, which they never had in our day. They had to wait until the end of the game before they were interviewed to make a comment. Now they can do it right away. So that puts the referee under more scrutiny, because within an instance, the referee, the benches know if you've made a mistake and you don't, especially if it's not a clear one, because VAR's not feeding anything into you. They're just saying check complete. So you know. Now, that's not to say there's no mistake, but what they're saying is check complete. We're not going to get involved in this. But there could still be, an opinion that it could be, a penalty kick, or it could be, but not clear enough. So, but it doesn't make any difference to the referee if someone's under pressure, because decision makings just come and you just make them and you move on. I don't think you think, if I'm going to do this, this is going to cost this manager his job, or so. I think the game is complicated enough for a referee without thinking about outside influences.
That must be quite tough for a referee though, if you've got a manager who's sitting and who's watched a tackle back, or watched a penalty shout back, or an offside shout back on an iPad and can see it back, and then you're obviously verbalising your displeasure at a decision to the referee, and they know that they've seen it back. Do you think that's when it's so important for a referee to be just quite firm within your mind? I need to move it, whether it's the right call or whether it's not. I can't afford to be distracted by what's going on at the sidelines here.
I think you're right. I think if there's a decision in the pitch that you all of a sudden are being informed by the bench that it's wrong, that you've made a wrong decision, whether it's a corner kick or a goal kick or a throw in, or small things like that, it can end up leading to attacking moves, or it can lead into goals. It's frustrating, but there's nothing you can do. It doesn't matter what they tell you. You go in at half time, and in my day we used to go into half time and there'd be a television in the dressing room on in certain stadiums, and we always ask for the television to be off.
Yeah.
Don't want the television on at half time.
When you're listening to pundits maybe giving an opinion on your own performance.
Or showing you a replay. And we would, you would know that maybe that decision was wrong, and then some stadium you go into and the television would be on at half time deliberately, to let you see that their team had been wronged. And of course we would say put the television off, because whether it's an offside decision which can affect an assistant referee's confidence going out in the second half, it doesn't do any good. It doesn't do any good at all. You need to have a clear mind when you go back out for that second half.
And clearly too, this is a game where you need an authority, almost a quiet authority within it.
Yeah, people used to ask me what it's like, and these new earphones that you buy now that cancel the noise. That's what it's like, and because you're trained to do that. You go to places like Celtic Park or Ibrox, and the noise, before the game, especially when if you go to Celtic Park and Celtic break that huddle, and the noise that comes out. As soon as you blow that whistle, everything just goes, and you can't hear anything. You can't hear a thing apart from players and decision making, because you're trained to do that. You need to block out everything, and a lot of people will say that's why the big clubs get the big decisions, because they hear the noise. I can only speak for myself and say that you really have to block all that out and just give what you see, not what you hear. Because normally what you see is normally accurate enough. Of course, when you move from one end of the pitch to the other, you're going to hear different noises, depending, and that's why you get trained early doors, just to cancel out all the noise and just focus on what happens in front of you.
Interestingly enough, you will have that movement of fans at Hampden and Sunday because you have a 50-50 split.
Yeah, and it's good.
Games.
Absolutely. Funny enough, I was watching the 2002 Cup final this morning because I knew we would be talking about Cup finals, and it's great to see that, where the stadiums are split and it's 50-50, and the atmosphere, and of course the passion of the fans, the celebration. The game I did in 2002 was 3-2.
It was the Loving Crown, is it?
Swinging, yeah, it's swinging from one end to the other, and I was preparing myself for extra time, because I thought, here goes extra time, warm, tired, and then Rangers scored the winner right at the end. But it was just, that's when the noise thing then opens up, because you don't need to concentrate as much then, and you can start to see what's going on. So it's good to see that 50-50 split back. It's a great advert for our game.
Did the games go quickly?
If you're doing well, they do. If they don't, if you've maybe had an early decision which you've got wrong, or you're racking up 2, 3 or 4 cautions early doors, and you're really thinking these guys are under pressure, so am I, it can be a long half. If the game's going well, then it's great. You don't want it to end, so that the time then goes a bit quicker, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, players are one thing that you're dealing with in the pitch, but what about managers? Who did you find easy to deal with in terms of Celtic Rangers managers on the sidelines, and who were a bit more prickly?
Yeah, I mean, you always stayed in your patch, which was the green part. Sometimes you were called across, but I used to tell my fourth official, don't bring me across unless I'm removing. Tommy Burns was an absolute dream to deal with. Tommy was so balanced, he was so disciplined, he was just a lovely, lovely guy. And I remember in an old firm, it was a Wednesday night game, where I think it was Kenny Clark was my fourth man, and Kenny shouted me across and he says, you're going to need to put Tommy Burns in the stand. And I says, no, Kenny, no. He went, yep, it was at Celtic Park. And I walked across, and Kenny had said to me there was an offside decision in the game, and I think Tommy was at the corner flag chasing the assistant referee down the line. And I thought it was offside, I've got to be honest, but television proved it wasn't offside. And I said to Tommy, Tommy, you need to just disappear up the tunnel, don't want to be shown. And he went, right, okay, no problem. And he just walked away. And that was the man that he was, So, and then you had the other side, you had people like, Dick Advocat, who was very passionate on the touchline, and but you can't treat the same person the same way. It depends the personality. Are they willing to listen to you? Are they willing to communicate with you? Are they willing to calm down and go back in? Or are they just want you across here for an argument?
Sometimes playing the gallery, did you ever feel that there was an element of...
Absolutely. They would play at the gallery. They would play at the gallery. I'll not mention any manager, but of course they do. They try to ship it onto you, for the simplest things. The arms are out, or they're down on their knees. But that happens. That's all part of the theatre of the game.
And I suppose a big part of it for a referee is not just the implementation of the laws of the game or the communication of it, but also the common sense handling of things round about it. And that, I suppose, so much of that only can come with experience. Yeah,
and that common sense is what we call in refereeing Law 18. There's 17 laws, in the book, but Law 18 is unwritten, and that's the law that will get you through big matches, because you need to use common sense. And I know that a lot of people will say, but if he commits a foul, it's a second card. But there's different styles the different types of yellow cards. There can be a yellow card for somebody persistently infringing the laws, and you say, right, enough. And then there can be maybe a foul which is borderline, which might have been a first yellow card, but you really don't want to give a second yellow card for that, because your job as a referee is to try and keep the players on the pitch. That's your job, is to try and manage them and manoeuvre the game and guide the players through. As I said, sometimes it doesn't happen. That you need to say, right, he's not listening, he's got to go, or they're maybe threatening other players with, what kind of tackles are going to do. You can't have that.
It's interesting to hear that from a referee's perspective, because I think a lot of players or a lot of fans you'll hear it often at a game if you're working and say, oh, you couldn't wait to send them off, you couldn't wait to get his cards out his pocket.
And I can only speak, from my own experience, nothing can be further from the truth. A second yellow card in a game really has to be, for me, clear. We do a coaching thing where we say a second yellow card has to be seen from the moon. In other words, everybody says, well, what can he do? It's when you get technical offences that are tough, like maybe kicking the ball away, for a second yellow card. But if they're delaying the restart of play and their team's winning and it's got an impact on the restart, then sometimes you have to take that action, but it's not an action that you want to take. And we always say, well, it's the player's fault. It's not my fault. I'm only applying the law. But I think John will use definitely Law 18 on Sunday for sure.
You were obviously involved in arguably one of the most infamous Celtic-Rangers games here in 1999. Do you ever escape it? Do you feel as though people always come back to it wherever you go? Yeah,
it certainly drew attention. Considering 18, 20 Old Firm games, whatever it was, that's the one they always remember. But there were other great matches to be involved in. But of course, on that day, it was just the whole mix of the bank holiday. The late kick-off, it's just, and of course that doesn't happen now. They would never have a 6 o'clock kick-off at night. So, it was an experience that you put yourself on that, on that platform, but you don't put your family on it. And when it comes to the house and stuff like that, that's when it's too much. But it's still a game that, it's etched in your memory as all the Old Firm games are.
Mm-hmm. Was there a point after that one where you thought, maybe I've had enough of this?
No, that never crossed my mind. Because I had the cup final 3 weeks later, which was already appointed. So I knew that I'd the game coming up, within 3 weeks, and the family, they weren't happy with it, that was coming up again. But the game passed off. Again, it was a memorable cup final, and everything was fine, So, but no, that's the nights that you're running around the Strathclyde Park in the dark and it's raining, and that's what that's all for, to put yourself up for these big games, on a Saturday.
Mm-hmm. There's another additional element that's come into play across the last decade or so. It's not really so much a referee's issue, but the pyro at games, and we saw at the semi-final, both semi-finals were delayed because of poor visibility prior to games kicking off. Is that a bit of a headache now for everyone, and how are we handling it? Are we handling it properly?
Yeah, the fans seem to think that the pyro things brings something to the game. I don't buy that. I don't see what it brings. I know it makes it colourful and things, but there's nothing better than the tifos that the fans put up, and as long as they're non-political, are fantastic to see, and a lot of work goes into these things. But the pyro thing, I just don't see it. They're dangerous. The clubs don't want it, So if you're a fan and you've got the best interest of your club at heart, because I know in UEFA competition, there's a delegate there who controls the whole safety along with the safety officer, and they're counting all these pyros going off, and the club are getting fined. So you can imagine, I mean, some of the fines that the clubs are getting could run some of the smaller clubs, for a month. So it's really unfortunate, but I'm quite sure the authorities will do everything they can, to try and stamp it out.
Would you be in favour of strict liability coming in?
I don't think it's for a referee now, or as an administrator. I think the authorities know how to deal with these things, and I think they'll go about the best way before they get to that. But I think they definitely need to stamp it out, because we've seen some serious injuries, with kids in particular.
Well, listen, that's all we have time for. Thank you to Hugh for joining us. Thank you for being so candid and honest about what a referee goes through in these games. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can download our app. You'll get all the breaking news at your fingertips.